So many people are taking fish oil or omega-3s every single day and are probably doing it wrong. The wrong dose, the wrong form, maybe even the wrong omega-3 entirely. And I'll be honest, I see this in my patients all of the time. Today, I brought an expert on to clear all of this up. We're going to cover EPA versus DHA, how much omega-3 you actually need, how to test your omega-3 levels, and the fact versus fiction about omega-3 side effects. This one is going to change how you think about omega-3. Our guest today is Dr. Bill Harris. Dr. Harris has been a leading researcher in the omega-3 fatty acid field for over 40 years. He has over 360 scientific papers on fatty acids and health, the vast majority on omega-3, making Dr. Harris ranked among the top 2% of scientists worldwide based on the impact of his research. On top of this, he has been on faculty of 3 medical schools and received 5 NIH grants to study omega-3. Dr. Harris is also a co-inventor of the Omega-3 Index and other omega-3 blood tests, and the founder of OmegaQuant Analytics. As far as I'm concerned, Dr. Harris is a complete legend, not only in omega-3 research, but I think in just science and health research in general. So huge honor to have him on, and I'm excited to dive into this episode. So without further ado, if you find value in health education directly from leading experts, doctors, and researchers, then please consider subscribing or following along here on the Dr. I Health podcast. It is absolutely free and not only helps us grow, but also helps remind you when our next episodes come out. Thank you again, and let's dive into omega-3s. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us here today. This is a huge honor for me because I've been not only reading publications you've done, I've been listening to some of your publications and posts over on YouTube and the advanced discussions you guys share. I even got to hear you lecture last year at the Brain and Ocular Nutrition Conference. So again, huge honor, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Oh, my pleasure. It was great to meet you last year. That was fun.
I know we have a lot of topics and questions to cover about omega-3s because this is a huge topic in like healthcare, and there's a lot of even I think confusion certainly about things that are posted here on the internet. So let's just kind of jump right in. We'll just start off from like for somebody who's never really learned too much about omega-3s. Maybe they're at the store and they see a product that says, now with omega-3s in it, or they see a bottle of supplements, or they even hear from their doctor that they should maybe take omega-3s or even eat more fish because of the omega-3s. Can you simplify like what omega-3 fatty acids are and like what they do in our body?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. I think what they are, simply most people understand what an oil, a dietary oil is, or a fat or an oil. You think about vegetable oil, bottles of it. We have it in our olive oil, whatever. Fish oils are like that. They're liquid oils. They contain almost 100%. They're made up of fatty acids. Fish oils are, and any oil is. And the fatty acids in fish oil are, I guess I probably maybe should back up and even just do what's a fatty acid. And a fatty acid is simply a long chain of carbon atoms. That's the fat. And on the end is an acid, chemically an acid group. So it's called a fatty acid. And the acid group is not like, you don't think about burning yourself with hydrochloric acid or anything like that. It's just a very common chemical form in the body. So that's fatty acids. If there are, if you have to get a little bit of your old chemistry, if there are only single bonds between the carbon atoms, you can have a double bond, a single bond, triple bond. If there are only single bonds, we call it a saturated fat. And that kind of fat is, think about tallow or lard or butter, Crisco. Those are solid at room temperatures. They're full of these saturated fatty acids. If you put one double bond in the molecule, you get what's called a monounsaturated fatty acid. The classic one is called oleic acid. It's very common in canola oil and olive oil. And that makes the oil a little more, makes it liquid instead of solid at room temperature. And then you can add 2 or more double bonds, and now you're talking about polyunsaturated fatty acids. And those are the ones that we typically think of in corn oil or safflower oil, sunflower oil. That's rich in the polyunsaturates. And the primary polyunsaturate in those oils is an omega-6 fatty acid. There's 2 families of polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-6 family, omega-3. Where does that name come from? Well, I told you about there's a long chain of carbon atoms that makes up a fatty acid. At the end of the long chain that doesn't have the acid group, we call that the omega carbon, because the acid group is the alpha, beginning of the Greek alphabet, and the last carbon is the omega carbon. It's the end of the Greek alphabet. It's the end of the molecule. So if you count back 6 positions, from there's your first double bond. That's an omega -6 fatty acid. Those are the ones linoleic acid is the classic one. It's an essential fatty acid. It's the one that's made up, like corn oil is 50%, soybean oil is roughly 50% made up of linoleic acid, omega-6. And I know that's been in the news a lot, and we could talk about that if you want to, but I like them. Some people don't. That's okay. But we're talking about omega-3 today, and the omega-3, so if I go to the end of the fatty acid chain and the omega carbon, you count back 3 positions, and that first double bond is there. That's the omega -3 or omega-3 fatty acids. And those are classically found in fish, seafood, oily fish particularly. When we say oily, you don't mean deep fat fried catfish. That's not what you're talking more about. Naturally oily fish, sardines, herring, albacore tuna, salmon is a great one. Those kinds of fish, mackerel, those are really oily fish. And those are the ones that are the highest in the good, what we call marine omega-3s. Then there's a plant omega-3 as well. And this is where people in the grocery store are going to get confused, because there is a form of omega-3, it's kind of a second cousin, but it is got that omega-3 structure. It's just not coming from the ocean. It's coming from a plant. Typically, it's going to be flax. Flaxseed oil is very rich in this particular. It's called ALA, or alpha-linolenic acid. It can be, and it's an omega-3, and it's not unimportant. It's just not a substitute for the fish oil omega-3s. It doesn't do the same thing. You can eat it, and we do eat a fair amount of it. There's some of it in soybean oil, and we eat a lot of soybean oil. And so we have a fair amount of ALA in our diet. It's an 18 carbon fatty acid, 18 carbons in the chain. EPA and DHA are the fish oil omega-3s, and they are 20 or 22 carbons long, so they're bigger molecules. But the 18 carbon plant omega-3 from flaxseed or from chia seeds or from black walnuts can be made to a very small extent, converted in your body to the long chain, EPA and DHA, but it's quite an inefficient process. So it's flaxseed oil or the plant omega-3 should not be confused with the marine omega-3, EPA, DHA. So I'll stop there and let you react, and we keep going.
No, I love that you broke that down, because I feel like we just got like an introductory course in biochemistry.
A little bit.
The conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA is something I think I've always heard people kind of discuss. I've seen at least 2-3 publications that have all kind of quoted that it's somewhere between 4 and 8% efficiency. It's pretty low.
It's probably lower than that, but that's, depends on how you do it, but it's low, right?
Yeah. And then this is probably a higher level question of just my own personal curiosity. But the rate limiting step for that conversion, it competes with some level of omega-6, does it not?
That's true, right? So you're talking about going from ALA toward EPA. That's the first step in that is the same process that linoleic acid, the omega-6, 18 carbon omega-6 essential fatty acid. that is the same step that fatty acid follows, going up to its bigger product called arachidonic acid. And so, yes, if the more of the linoleic you have, the less of the ALA is going to get converted. That's generally true. And so that's part of the reason that people think the omega-6s are bad and the omega-3s are good. But I think it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than that. But there is competition for that step. You're right.
And that nuance, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's where I feel a lot of confusion with omega-6s and then omega-3 debate come in. And maybe we'll, if we have time, I definitely think we should try to tackle that. Sure. Maybe we can even make a special mini episode just breaking that down.
Sure.
Because I think that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, it is right now, especially with seed oils on the radar, like a lot of people have. Yeah.
Just thinking about omega-3s though, again, we've heard that there's a lot of benefits of omega-3s, like potentially for different parts in the body. So when you get omega-3s in the body, again, you have ALA and then you have EPA and DHA. Can you break down kind of some of the examples of how this helps our body?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the best evidence for help is from the EPA and DHA, the marine omega-3s. And we know there's lots of studies have been done. We've done some, others have too, that have looked at, first of all, randomized trials. So a randomized clinical trial is a study where you take a group of people, whether they're healthy or not. The question is, you divide them in half randomly. You give half of them a placebo, a fake oil, like just a capsule with corn oil in it or something. And you give the other half an omega-3 EPA DHA product. And then you see what effect that has on either developing a disease or some kind of an intermediate marker like your blood lipid levels, like a triglyceride level. And we know from those kinds of studies that the omega-3s, EPA DHA, will significantly lower one of the two major blood fats, called triglycerides, not really have much of an effect on cholesterol per se, but triglycerides are reduced by omega-3. Similarly, those kinds of studies have shown that the omega-3s at higher doses, they say 2 or 3 grams a day, have a blood pressure lowering effect. They also have an effect on heart rate, which is something people don't think about very much. How fast is your heart beating just at rest? And we know that people who have higher omega-3 intakes have a slightly, 2 or 3 beats a minute slower heart rate. Well, you go, well, big deal. Well, it is a big deal because in time that adds up. And some people used to think that, a lifespan is a fixed number of heartbeats. Probably not quite right, but don't use them up when you don't have to.
You don't get tachycardia.
Yeah, you're right. Don't get tachycardia. Anyway, there's a slower heart rate, which kind of reflects a shift in what we call the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and these two nervous systems really control a lot of reactions, a lot of processes in our body. And a lower heart rate reflects a little bit less of the sympathetic drive, which is also good, generally speaking, for your overall health. We know the omega-3 fatty acids also make your blood a little bit thinner. Not literally thinner, but that's what people always think. When you're told to take aspirin, so your blood doesn't clot inappropriately. The omega-3s do that. They help the blood not to be to clot at inappropriate places and inappropriate times. You, of course, want blood to clot, but not in your heart muscles, not in your brain. You have a stroke or a heart attack. So that's another reason. And then omega-3s are really anti-inflammatory. They have a pretty broad spectrum suppression of the chronic inflammatory state is reduced by omega-3. So those are the kinds of things that they do. How does it manifest in terms of actual diseases? That's the important question. Not so much what's the mechanism. It's do they do anything important as far as reducing risk for disease? And there's many studies that have now shown that giving people omega-3 or people who have higher omega-3 blood levels because they're eating more typically. That's generally what drives your omega-3 levels, how much EPA and DHA you eat. Those people have less risk for cardiovascular disease, particularly death from cardiovascular disease, not necessarily heart attacks per se. There's some evidence for that, but certainly fatal heart attacks, the worst kind. There's also reduced risk for stroke. We've seen in people who have higher omega-3 levels. We've done a whole bunch of studies looking at blood levels of omega-3 in very big populations and linking those blood levels of omega-3 with certain health outcomes over time. And for example, one of them we did where we had about 50 or 60,000 people from 17 or 18 different studies. We pooled it all together, and we had the omega-3 level in the blood on everybody. So we take everybody and divide them up into groups of 20%, the lowest 20%, 40, 60, 80. We call those quintiles. So the lowest quintile, 1/5, is what we'll call the reference group. And then we compare their risk for disease, whether it's heart disease, whether it's diabetes, whether it's death from anything. That's of course, the most important endpoint is death. And we asked the question, do people have the highest omega-3 levels have any difference in risk than the people in lowest for these different diseases? And routinely, we always see the people who have the highest omega-3 levels are the ones who have the lowest risk for developing diabetes, for developing heart disease, for dying from anything, for dying from heart disease, for dying from cancer, for dying from other causes, for developing chronic kidney disease, et cetera, et cetera. So the thing we really care about is not so much what's the mechanism. We don't care about a mechanism if there is no health effect, right? You got to have a health effect before you start worrying about mechanisms. So we've clearly shown that there's a relationship between higher omega-3 levels and good health outcomes. And then we bounce back to why is that? And all those little mechanisms I mentioned. So right. That's kind of the why omega-3s are helpful and kind of how they do it.
And I'm happy that you kind of spoke to all of that, because I know in the eye care space, we focus on omega-3s, not just for, I'll say there is some debate about their utility in dry eye because of some studies that kind of have conflicting evidence. Yeah. But we know that the retina in the back of the eye, about 40 to 60% of the lipids in the retina are of DHA omega-3 because it's an extension of the brain. And the brain and neural parts of the body have high amounts of DHA. Right. And so they have shown in some studies that people who consume more fish in their diets are less likely to develop not only conditions like age-related macular degeneration, which affects the retina, but also people who are diabetic get less severe diabetic retinopathy, and or they have less chance of developing retinopathy at all from diabetes. And so there of course, are a lot of different studies of various supplement amounts and things like that they've tried to mimic. But most studies still show that people who consume oily fish at least twice a week have some benefits for at least retinal health. Yeah.
That's true. That's right. And some supplement studies have shown that. And we have a study now, we're looking at the blood DHA levels in about 450,000 people in what's called the UK Biobank. It's a really big observational study. And we're now seeing people have the highest DHA levels in their blood, have lowest risk for age-related macular degeneration. So that's confirming that once again. I mean, it's sort of been seen in other trials too, but this is a bigger population. And so we're kind of putting more nails in that coffin right now.
So would you say that most people are probably omega-3 deficient? I don't know if we can say that.
Yeah, deficient's depending on how you want to define that. I mean, we think, we developed a blood test over 20 years ago called the Omega-3 Index. And it's a test that can be done with a drop of blood on a finger stick, or it can be done with a regular blood draw. But basically, it measures the amount of EPA and DHA in the red blood cell membrane. Yeah, so we know that the omega-3s live and do their work largely in membranes, in cell membranes. Cell membranes are made up almost completely of fatty acids, phospholipids, but the fatty acids are the main part. And the omega-3s live and work and in the membrane. And so we like to measure the membrane levels of omega-3 fatty acids. And the easiest cell to get at to do that is the red blood cell. Obviously, your blood is about 45% red blood cells. So we can measure that. So we've kind of established that a EPA DHA level in a red cell of about 8%. That means 8% of the fatty acids in the membrane are EPA DHA. That's 8 to 12% is really the optimal place to be. Where you really don't want to be is 4% or lower. So we'll call that's probably deficient in a way. It's certainly suboptimal. And then they're in the middle between 4% and 8% is kind of intermediate, sort of where most Americans are in that 5% area. Europeans are in that general area. People in Japan who eat a lot of fish are roughly 9 to 10% omega-3 index, which is very interesting because the Japanese also, speaking of longevity, they live about 4 years longer than the average American lives. And I think it's partly, at least, there's a lot of things different between Japanese culture and American, of course. Mm-hmm. But part of it is omega-3, I think. And we've seen people that, even Americans or Europeans with higher omega-3 levels live longer than people that have low omega-3 levels. So I think that's part of what the Japanese are telling us too.
I'm glad that you brought up the omega-3 index test because I've used this myself. I actually did a YouTube video maybe 3-4 years ago, specifically looking at more dry eye. But I ordered one of these tests and just diet alone. And at that time, I was largely eating. I can't claim a full vegan diet, but it was still very plant focused and not eating much fish. Yeah. And I wasn't taking any omega-3 supplements. And I did a omega-3 test, and my number was around like 4.3%. It was low. And so then I took supplements for 3-4 months, and I got that number up to like, I don't remember, it was like 9, I think in the 9% range.
That's good. Yeah, it's a big jump.
And then I later thought, okay, let me do a washout. So I did 6 months of not taking supplements, did my tests again, but this time I was only eating fish, like salmon specifically, once or twice, tried to get about twice a week. And there, my numbers dropped down to like 5. So I was back in the kind of that normal US range, just eating oily fish twice a week. Now, who knows, was the fish that I was buying not super high quality in the omegas? Was the way I was cooking it, changing it there? And maybe there's some individual variances in how I absorbed it. But it was fascinating just to be able to see how I could throttle those numbers over the course of months, because it takes 2-3 months for your body to really allocate those omegas? Yeah,
actually, it takes for all of your red blood cells to be completely fresh and new. It takes about 4 months. Yeah. So we usually say 3 to 4 months after you make a change in your omega-3 intake, retest. You'd be pretty close to where your new steady state is going to be. So that's reasonable. I'm surprised at 2 salmon meals a week, if you really did it. They were still in the only 5-ish area. I would have thought maybe 6 or 7, but
it was it could have been because I kind of think maybe where I was buying it, maybe it wasn't the best.
It could be,
or again the way I think there's so many other variables. I don't know, but it was still a really great personal experience to see how that could make a difference. Yeah. And then I later tried a different, after that second one where I measured around 5, I tried an algae-based omega-3 to see how I responded there. And again, it went up, but this time only to like 7.5.
How many? 8. Do you remember how many milligrams of DHA you were taking? EPA,
I don't remember. I do have record of it, so I can pull it up at some point. But I think it was around somewhere between 1 and 2,000. But
Yeah, well, that's
again, every brand is so different in their formulation.
they're all different, and every body is different, as you allude to, and so that's why it's important to test personally. It's kind of a personalized nutrition strategy that you monitor yourself. You don't need a doctor to do this. You just have to have again, consumers can do it. It's nice when it's done under the auspices of a healthcare provider, because the doctor can add a little more weight to if you're low, a recommendation from a doctor will help get you to move it up and just maintain it. You don't really fix it. You never really fix it in the sense of getting over a cold. If you want to be consistently at 8%, you got to keep taking as much omega-3 as you need to get to 8%. You can't just stop and say it's going to stay there. It's not.
Right. And there's, again, some variability with diet versus are you taking supplements, how consistent you are.
Right.
I know, at least when I did this, I just ordered the test myself online, and it was simple and easy. And I do have some other eye doctors I know who have these tests at their clinic, because some patients will come in, they're like, oh, I take a fish oil supplement, and they're like, well, we don't know if you're still reaching that optimal spot, so let's at least do a test. And it's been really enlightening to hear kind of their responses.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real eye opener to a lot of people, because they think they're eating a healthy diet, eating a lot of fish. And I take a fish oil supplement, but I actually forget 2 or 3 days a week, and actually it's not a very good supplement. But when they really see the number, they say, oh, okay, I got to do something about that. And that's good.
Yeah. Let's actually talk about the fish oil kind of supplement world. Maybe we can kind of break down from the user experience. If you're at the store and you pick up a bottle, or maybe you have a bottle at home, if you look at the back label, like, how do we make sense of that? Because usually it'll say something like fish oil, 1,000 or 2,000 milligrams, but underneath, then we read EPA, and it'll be like 200 milligrams.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have any kind of guidance on like how to make sense of that, or if there's a certain amount of EPA, DHA milligrams we should be aiming for? Yeah.
So if just go back to your consumer walking down the aisle, and you'll see bottles that say omega-3. Well, first thing you got to figure out, is it fish oil or is it flaxseed oil? Because the folks who make the flaxseed oil, the plant omega-3, will put omega-3 in bold letters right on the front. And it's not a lie. It's just not the kind of omega-3 you want. So make sure it's marine or fish oil based, or krill oil or algal oil. Those are all omega-3 sources. And then, as you said, turn around, and even if it says 1,000 milligrams on the front, what that means is there's 1,000 milligrams, or 1 gram of fish oil in the pill. That's how big the pill is. But that doesn't tell you how much EPA and DHA is in that pill. And so, to your point, if you look at the nutrition facts panel on the back, first thing you look at is the serving size. And typically it's going to say 2 capsules would be considered a serving. And so then all the numbers below that are related to having what's in 2 capsules. So if it says 600 milligrams of EPA and 400 milligrams of DHA, that's per 2. So each one has got 300 and 200, half as much. So to figure out what your dose is, and you asked about like what's a good dose. Typically we say, and this is based on research we've done, if you're starting out at 4%, you kind of got to know where you start. If you're 4%, on average, you need about 1,500 milligrams of EPA plus DHA. And the ratio is not that important, but the sum of the two, EPA, DHA, to get up to around an 8%. That's about 50% of people will achieve an 8%, going from 4% by taking about 1,500 milligrams. So that's a good place to start to estimate. We have actually on our website that our company's called Omega Quant. So Omega, then QUANT, OmegaQuant.com. That's where we sell the blood tests. But we have a omega-3 index calculator on that page where you can put in what your current omega-3 index is, and it'll tell you, well, this is how many milligrams you probably should increase your omega-3 in order to try and get that 8%. So it's not a guarantee. It's an average across a lot of people, but that's a good place to start.
I love that. Thank you for adding that. We'll include links in the show notes as well, going directly to the OmegaQuant website, and you guys can take a look at that if you want. I love getting some input on that like 1500 mark is a good way as a benchmark for me, even as a clinician, to have an idea of where to go. Because I know some studies in the eye care space go all the way up to like 3000.
Oh yeah.
And so, but then there's studies that only do like 200-300. So I'm like, well, how can you make a meaningful judgment off of that?
Well, that's a good point, because you'll see papers or news articles about a new study that came out with omega-3. Omega-3s didn't work. Well, how much were they given? How long did the study go? How many people were in the study? I mean, to not work, it paints a very broad brush picture of, and it will essentially say, don't worry about omega-3s. They don't work. Oh yeah, well, they only gave them 500 milligrams a day and studied them for a year, and they were looking for some cardiovascular benefit. Well, of course it's not going to work. You got to give it time, and you got to give it dose. And so you need to be a little more discerning than that.
I know something I've heard for the last decade is kind of this argument about the form of omega-3 supplement between ethyl ester versus re-esterify or re-triglyceride forms.
Re-esterified.
Re-esterified.
Or sometimes restructured. That's the other term they use.
Can you give some comment on that? And is there a true benefit to going with one or versus the other?
Yeah, just to back up a little bit, the typical fish oils you get are going to either be in a triglyceride form. Triglyceride is what we talked about. Oils, the chemical name for an oil is a triglyceride, an edible oil. We're not talking about petroleum oils, but edible oils. They're all in a chemical form called triglyceride, which is one molecule, what's called glycerol, glycerol, and to that molecule of glycerol are attached 3 different fatty acids. And in a typical fish oil, one of those 3 fatty acids is going to be EPA or DHA. So a standard basic omega-3 fish oil product is going to be about 30% EPA plus DHA, because the other 2 fatty acids in that glycerol are not EPA and DHA. In order to, so basically in order to get a gram of EPA and DHA, you're going to need to take 3 to 4 capsules of that stuff a day, because there's only 300 milligrams, right? So people wanted to concentrate the omega-3s more, make sure we get more omega-3s in a capsule. So what they do is to make a re-esterified or a restructured triglyceride, what they do is they take that basic oil, and they chop off the non-omega-3 fatty acids from that glycerol backbone, and then they take some additional EPA and DHA and stick EPA and DHA on that backbone. So now you've got, instead of 1 omega-3, you've got 2 or 3 omega-3s on a triglyceride. That's a restructured, that's more expensive because it's a lot more work for the manufacturer to do that. So that's why those things are more expensive, but you don't have to take as many capsules because it's a more concentrated form. The triglyceride form is probably the best absorbed form in your body. The other way to get more omega-3 in a capsule is, as you mentioned, ethyl ester form. So in that case, you start off with that basic triglyceride fish oil, you chop all the fatty acids off, you throw away all the non-omega-3s, and then you add ethanol, which is a alcohol, right? And ethanol will react with the omega-3s at the acid group and make what's called an ethyl ester, because it's an ethanol and it's hooked now to the fatty acid. And it's one molecule that's just got the omega-3 and a little tail of ethanol on it. And you can jam a whole bunch of that in one capsule. more so than a restructured triglyceride, and sometimes primarily. And so there are two omega-3 drugs on the market now for approved pharmaceutical products. One's called Lovesa, the other one is called Vascepa, and they are ethyl ester forms. And they are highly concentrated. The only problem with the ethyl ester forms is if you take them on an empty stomach, they're very poorly absorbed. If you take them with food, particularly with fatty food that gets all your normal digestive juices going, absorption is better, but it's not as good as the triglyceride oil. But you should really always take fish oils, whether it's an ethyl ester or a triglyceride, or restructured triglyceride, or a phospholipid. Really, they're best all taken with food. That's just the normal milieu in which you digest fat the best. So again, that's sort of the difference between ethyl esters and triglycerides and restructured triglycerides.
Now, you did just mention phospholipids. This is a little bit, I think, outside the conversation, but I know I've been hearing a little bit more in the research space about like phospholipid. I've seen a few products on the market that are like phospholipid combined with omega-3s. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's a little disingenuous because the phospholipid molecule has two fatty acids on the molecule. It's kind of like a triglyceride, except you're missing one fatty acid. So you got two fatty acids on a phospholipid, and when they hook omega-3 to one or two of those spots, then you have X amount of omega-3 in a product, and you could also count the same thing as phospholipid. Okay, fine, but it's an omega-3 enriched phospholipid, and that's a very well absorbed. That's kind of largely what krill oil is. It's more enriched in phospholipids, and I think the jury's still out as to whether that's more well absorbed than a triglyceride, or that it's actually better for you in some health sense than a triglyceride. I don't think we really know for sure that that's the case. I'm happy if people take either one because they're getting their omega-3 index up with either one of those. Yeah. But you are starting to hear about a thing called LPC DHA or LPC of omega-3.
I've been lysophosphatidylcholine.
Lysophosphatidylcholine, right. And phosphatidylcholine is a phospholipid. It's also called lecithin for people who've read labels. It's a very common food additive. Lecithin usually comes from soybeans or from eggs. But the lecithin that's got omega-3 in it doesn't come from soybean and eggs, it comes from fish. So again, it's a phosphatidylcholine or lecithin. It's got two fatty acids on it. If you chop off one of them and just leave the omega-3, that's called a lysophosphatidylcholine. And that is the form that is thought to be taken up into the brain most readily. What's not clear outside of animal studies, hasn't been done in humans yet, is to whether taking that preformed lysophosphatidylcholine as a supplement in your mouth actually raises your blood levels of omega-3 lysophosphatidylcholine, LPC, DHA. There's a whole lot of steps that you go through between your mouth and what's in your blood. And it could be that just taking a regular triglyceride fish oil may be able to raise your LPC DHA levels just as well as taking an LPC DHA product. I've not seen a comparison. That needs to be done. It's not that hard to do.
I'm happy that you commented on that because I have seen a few preclinical studies in mice that are at least hinting to that, hey, this may have an effect on the retina and may have an application for eye health. But just as exactly like you said, everything I can dig up on it is mostly in preclinical studies. And there's a lot of question of where is it going to absorb in the intestine? Is it going to make that meaningful difference?
Yeah.
So we I still think I'm cautious as a provider. I'm always like, I say, you know what, focus on eating the fish that we know of and of course the clinical studies on supplementation that we know is in humans and how it affects us. So I think the jury's still out.
I think that's wise. Time will tell whether the LPC form, which is much more expensive, per gram of omega-3 than a regular fish oil. So we got to show that that's worth the effort and worth the expense.
I know you kind of commented that the ratio between EP-DHA, that you don't suggest worrying about that too much.
No, I don't. I really think people should take both EPA and DHA. So they're both in nature. Every time you find this in nature in fish, they're going to be together. They're always there together. So whether it's a little more DHA in your supplement than EPA or vice versa, I don't think makes much difference. As opposed to just taking a pure DHA product or a pure EPA product, I think I would vote for taking both of them together. Now, the one area where we think that there may be a benefit, what's been seen in clinical trials, is in depression, where when people have looked back, a whole bunch of studies have been done on people with depression. And depression's a real grab bag of different problems. But in any event, placebo-controlled, one group gets omega-3, one group gets a placebo, and then they look at the effects on symptoms of depression. And when they look back at these studies and kind of do what they call a meta-analysis, which is pooling them all together, the products that have more EPA in them than DHA seem to stand out as being better at improving their depressive symptoms, which is a little bit of a surprise because people always think depression, brain, mind, brain, DHA, very little EPA in the brain. So it's one of the surprises of research is we kind of find things we didn't expect. And so perhaps in that context, if you're particularly interested in depression and trying to maybe mediate that, take an EPA-rich product. And meaning it's got more EPA in it than DHA.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. I also, when you were saying it, I'm like, oh, I imagine it would be DHA, but it's interesting. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I'll have to look more into that.
Yeah.
The other kind of big question around supplementation is, you kind of mentioned again that 1500 is a good spot, and there's that calculator. People can use that as a resource. Is there an upper limit? Is there a point where there's a lot of caution that gets raised if people are taking too much omega-3?
Yeah. Short answer, no. It's sort of self-limited. You can only eat so much fish. You can only take so many pills. I mean, you can go crazy with it if you want. But yeah, we say our omega-3 index target is between 8 and 12% in the red cell. Can you get higher than that by taking more omega-3? Yes. We've seen 15%, 16%. What I don't know is if that gives you any additional benefit. I mean, are we at diminishing returns here? Do you get actually any additional benefit of health at that level than you get at 8 to 12%? We don't know that. There are so few people actually in that bucket that it's very hard to do research in that area. We're comfortable with that 8 to 12%. You can get that level by taking probably maybe up to 2 or 3 grams a day at the high end of that thing. That is, it's not impossible nutritionally to do that with salmon, with fish. I mean, I think we know of people that are on a sardine diet, eat sardines, that's all they eat every day. And that'll drive your omega-3 index up pretty good. It's just not very sustainable.
I just had some the other day.
Did you? Yeah, good.
I was in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands giving some lectures, and I guess eating herring is a big part of their culture. And so I tried some, and then I thought, you know what, this might be an acquired taste. Maybe I need to learn.
That's a nice way of saying it. Right.
So now I kind of did it's almost like a charcuterie board, but of different condiments of like hot sauce, mustard. Do I want vinegar, salt? How do I like edible? To eat my... Yeah. so that's that. I've been testing my palate that way.
But the concerns that people typically raise about having too much omega-3 is bleeding. It's the primary one, because as I mentioned, the omega-3s do thin your blood, and there's always been this concern. Some early studies in the 80s showed really high doses of omega-3 did prolong the bleeding time, make you bleed longer, not clot as fast, which is what it should do, like aspirin. And there were occasional concerns about Eskimos getting nosebleeds and, dying from a hemorrhage of a nosebleed. And so that kind of built this picture into the public mind that you develop this urban myth that omega-3s will cause you to bleed excessively. And that's been studied many times and shown not to be the case. Even if you're on aspirin or Coumadin for AFib, there's no increased risk for what they call clinically significant bleeding. And that's actually what the FDA put on the package insert of the prescribing information for the two omega-3 drugs, Vascepa and Loveza, and says they don't cause clinically significant bleeding. And there are situations where we've seen higher omega-3 intakes associated with lower risk for bleeding. There was a nice paper about meta-analysis on that a couple of years ago from Scotland. So don't worry about bleeding. You may bruise a little bit more taking omega-3. The question is that I think it's probably a sign of health that you do that. That's probably means that your omega-3s are working. And that's, I think Americans are used to having a bleeding time or having a coagulation risk that's unhealthy. And we need to move it up toward kind of what a Japanese would be. And interestingly, I think the Japanese are much less likely to use anticoagulants in medical procedures because people are already high on omega-3 and they don't need it.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers on that, but thank you for mentioning that because the bleeding is always a question I get during lectures when I talk with other doctors about it. And because, we're sending people for various eye surgeries sometimes, and that's always a question. But yet, I personally have never worked with a surgeon who had taken somebody off their omega-3s. I've never ran into that. I've heard some other doctors say that, yeah, maybe a surgeon has taken a patient off, but
for eye surgery? For
eye surgery, but occasionally we have patients who have other health issues going on.
Sure.
And so we have to send them to other types of surgeons.
Yeah, but I mean it's kind of silly because it's sort of standard in the general surgery world to say, here's a list of things you should stop before you go in surgery. And it's aspirin and 50 other things you're supposed to not take. And they always put fish oil on there. And I always laugh at it because they say, like the week before or a few days before you go into surgery, stop this. Well, your omega-3 levels, even if you stop it then, it's not going to change for weeks because they turn over very slowly. So you're not lowering your tissue levels of omega-3 by stopping your fish oil 3 days before surgery. But it's
a really good point.
Yeah. So
I know the other big thing when it comes to taking omega-3s that has been coming up is because of last year, there were some more publications on atrial fibrillation. Mm-hmm. And can you summarize that or kind of what the ultimate findings were?
Yeah, we're working on a paper on that right now. It turned out in a couple of the studies, they gave high doses of omega-3 to patients who were really at high risk for cardiovascular disease. This is a study called Strength, a study called Reduce It. Those studies gave, again, 3 to 4 grams of EPA and DHA, and they saw an unexpected increase, a small increase in the development of atrial fibrillation, which is where the upper chambers of the heart don't beat in sync with the lower very well, or they vibrate, which is not a pleasant thing. The thing that most people are concerned about when they have AFib is that sets you up for a potential stroke because blood clots can form in the upper chambers of the heart. And if you don't properly, if you're not pumping in the right directions, you're not going to filter them out and the clot could go up to your brain. So people worry about stroke if they have AFib. And so these two studies found an increase in risk for AFib that if you express it as what's called a relative risk, which is a percent increase in risk, it was about 50% increase in risk for AFib in people taking omega-3 on these trials, ballpark. If you express it as an absolute risk, you're looking at about a 1% increased risk for AFib, meaning that people in the placebo group About maybe 2% of them developed AFib during this 5-year trial. And in the omega-3 group, it was maybe 3% instead of 2%. So that's a 1% absolute risk increase, which is very small. And we've also seen that it's the people, it doesn't translate into increased risk for stroke. Actually, is lower risk for stroke. In the same studies where they saw a little increased risk for AFib, there's lower risk for stroke. So we don't really know what to do with it. What we've studied is we've done a look at a lot of different trials. And it turns out that really it's only at that 3 to 4 gram dose in people with high risk for cardiovascular disease. They're the ones where you see the AFib risk. If you look at people who are at high risk, they get lower doses, no increase for AFib. If you look at people who are generally healthy or they don't have heart disease or not at risk, and you give them those high doses, no increased risk for AFib. And at the bottom of that, low risk, low dose, no increase for AFib. So it's not something that's widespread in the omega-3 world. It's particularly people who are under a doctor's care on heart medicines and at high risk for cardiovascular disease and taking high doses.
That's really good input. Thank you for kind of just breaking that down, because I've read, you can read the study and understand it, but then you go online and you can hear all sorts of people claiming one thing or another, or kind of going dramatizing it, going another direction.
I know.
And part of that's just part of that might just be for people to get clicks, but
really.
Hearing at least
you might be right.
From someone,
might be right.
Someone like yourself that has read this and broken it all down and does the research, it speaks to it a lot.
Yeah.
One question. So actually, again, I'm part of the Ocular Wellness Nutrition Society in the eye care space, and I mentioned to them that I was going to be speaking to you, and I asked them, like, do you guys have any questions or anything for Dr. Bill Harris? And one person said, like, hey, can you ask him, has he ever read the DREAM study in the dry eye space?
Yeah.
And I don't know, have you? And if you have, do you have any thoughts or comments or about that study?
And again, that's your specialty, not mine. But in that study, right, I think people were allowed to have any number of ancillary treatments for dry eye. Okay, that's fine. I mean, you want to know if omega-3 adds to the standard of care. That's not an unreasonable question. The dose they used was, I don't think, they didn't measure the omega-3 index achieved, as far as I know. So I don't know if they gave them enough.
Yeah, I think they did measure the index, but I don't remember how they measured it. But they did give them around 3,000 milligrams of the omega-3. Yeah. But then the placebo control, and this is where some people have some arguments, the placebo they gave was like 5,000 milligrams of corn oil, olive oil.
Olive oil?
And
right.
Ultimately, at the end of 1 year, they didn't find a clinically significant benefit to symptoms of dry eye or any major parameters.
Yeah. No, I remember that, and it was disappointing. I have a little hard time attributing the lack of a difference between treatments to the olive oil. I mean, if that were really the case, then you'd give people olive oil. if that's active and actually reducing risk, well, that's a lot easier to take than fish oil. And just put it on your salads, that kind of thing. So no, I don't have a good, solid explanation for why the omega-3s didn't work in DREAM.
Yeah.
There have been other studies where it did work. So
that's kind of where a lot of eye doctors debate, is because there's also quite a few studies and huge meta-analyses that have found that no, like they do result in benefits. And one interesting side comment, that DREAM study, they then took some of the people who took the omega-3s in the original study, which was only a small handful, it was like 50 people. Then they bisected, had some of them continue omega-3s for another year. The other ones dropped off the omega-3s, and they tried to say, okay, was there a difference? And again, they didn't really find a huge difference. But another group, I think it was published in Cornea, they compiled all the data. And once they compiled all the data from the 2 years, they found that it did have at least a significant improvement in staining of the conjunctiva, which from my standpoint, as somebody who's studying the conjunctiva and dry eye scenarios, that is a sign of inflammation.
Okay.
So there might be something there. But yeah, that's where I think the biggest debate is, at least in omega-3s in the dry eye space.
Well, to me, if again, I'm not a clinician like yourself, but if there's some chance that it's going to help in the dry eye space, particularly, I mean, we think it also helps with AMD. But there's all these other non-eye related health outcomes that are benefited by omega-3. And so at the end of the day, you got virtually no risk, and you have some maybe questionable eye benefits, but definitely bigger health benefits if you're taking care of the patient as a whole person. To me, if they've got dry eye and you have an excuse for recommending omega-3, you can do it with a clear conscience.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And that's kind of where I've been as I've tried to make sense of all of this omega-3 information.
Yeah.
From here, is there anything else that you can add or share, or final kind of thoughts and comments for people who are watching and listening in?
I think just, of course, I'm biased because we developed the blood test, but I really encourage people to get an omega-3 test and figure out where they're at, and then titrate themselves, dose themselves, whether it's with fish or supplements, to get up in that 8%. There's just so many happy things that happen up there that you would not otherwise appreciate if you didn't know that you had an omega-3 index in the healthy zone. You're just counting on the fact that you're taking a supplement, or I eat fish once in a while. It's not going to get it there. You really need to test yourself. And so that's the primary message I'd leave. And that omega-3s are just one of the nutrients that are principally lacking in the Western diet, particularly. And anything you can do to improve that is going to improve your health.
And then what's your favorite, other than, not supplement, but just if you're going to eat fish, what fish would you eat and how would you prepare it based on your just taste and preferences?
Oh, well, and we have this acronym called SMASH fish, which is SMASH, right? Which stands for salmon, mackerel, anchovies. I don't know who eats anchovies, but that's an A. I prefer albacore tuna, which is also an A, and higher omega-3 than the chunk light tuna. And then sardines, that's the other S word. And H would be herring, which you're working on yourself, I understand. But yeah, those are the fish. SMASH is the acronym for the fish that are really good.
I love that. Well, Dr. Bill Harris, thank you so much for coming on, to spending some time with us again, and congratulations. Hats off to you, man, for all you've accomplished, all the research that you've worked on,
Thank you.
And people that you've helped, and including doctors like myself. Your research and contributions have made an impact on me and how I can better help my patients. So I hope at some point you can sit and reflect on you've done a lot of great work.
Well, thank you. That it does a heart good as a scientist to be able to think you've actually made a difference and didn't just discover a new protein.
Well, no, thank you again so much for your time. And hopefully at some point as we get questions, maybe we'll be able to reconnect and talk again soon.
Anytime, Joe. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Dr. Eye Health Podcast with Dr. Joseph Allen. For more resources, trusted information, and helpful tools, visit dreyehealth.com. Thanks for joining the community that's focused on healthier eyes and a healthier life. Until next time, stay informed and keep your vision sharp.